It's emotional to talk about, It's emotional to talk about because these issues, these are not new. These are not new. There'll be people watching thinking, these are challenges and problems that we've heard again and again and again, but these things don't change unless we change.
Yeah.
So I hope there are people who make a decision, a decision to do differently and to take responsibility. Who knows? Let's see. So sometimes I talk about underrepresented women, but it's a very disempowering term. But it is women who go into spaces where they are not represented in the majority. So we can say Black women and construe that as broadly as the term suggests. And that term means anyone who has experienced discrimination on the basis of the colour of their skin. So that covers brown women, or we can say Black and brown women. I think the issues relate to all of us. And, sometimes it doesn't matter what term you use, it's always going to be the wrong one for someone. But recently, I've heard so many people use so many different terms. The global majority aims to be a really empowering term. But again, what it does is it just lumps us all together. There's nothing common in any of us. It takes away that uniqueness.
I've never heard that term.
So I don't know whether it's something that we talk more about in the voluntary sector, in the charity sector. It seems to be the term of choice. It recognises that Black women might be in the minority in some spaces, but actually on a global scale, we represent the majority.
And all this categorization, are we then, as Black women, as brown women, trying to then fit into this box that is already predefined for us? And as a result, playing small? I mean, I'm putting words into your mouth now, but
it's it's an interesting question because there's something about perception and what do people hear and what do people think of when they hear the term Black women. Because for many of us, we have been in spaces where the categorization of Black women equals aggression, equals being of a dissenting view or of an opposing view, and it brings with it negative connotations. So when we stand up and identify as Black women, are we identifying with all of those things that other people's perceptions define us to be? And so, people rightly I think people should, reclaim this word. We are proud Black women, but we're not always made to feel like we can or should be. So I think it's crazy that we spend so much time trying to define it and spend so much time trying to argue about it amongst us about what term is socially acceptable. My school of thinking is that if I understand the point you're trying to make, I'm good. There are more important things that we need to move forward past this conversation so that we can engage in. And sometimes we get stuck. We get stuck into having these conversations about, how and, how do we identify ourselves as a group. I'm mixed heritage, as you know. So I'm Black, I'm brown, I'm African, I'm Asian, I'm proudly a part of all of them. And, the Olympics are on at the moment and I'm cheering everyone. I'm like, they could all be my cousins. I'm very inclusive. I'm very proud to identify as all of the richness that's around us. For me, that's a strength. I love it.
I love that. But when it's not a strength, how do you think is showing up with the leaders that you work with in terms of them going into spaces where they feel potentially it's a stigma?
So this is a real issue for the leaders that I work with. And for many of them, when they go into spaces of influence, spaces of strategy, spaces of power in particular, where very, very often they are in the minority, the types of things people share with me are, that these spaces feel hostile to them. Brilliant, brilliant people with decades of experience in frontline service delivery, delivering really impactful work, telling me that they walk into spaces and they see a difference in status, that they go in there and their only aim is to be as quiet as possible. Can you imagine? I spoke to one of my ladies yesterday. She told me that she has never been in such a position of influence and been so quiet, whilst having so much to say. So these are things that are painful for me to hear, and they're no longer surprising, but it's because they are walking into spaces and their perception is that how they are being received is firstly as a Black person, and then as a woman, and then with all of the other perceptions that they have before they've even spoken, and that all of how they receive what they hear is being seen through those lenses. And we feel that. We know what that feels like when we walk into spaces. We talk from a position of confidence and experience. And sometimes that comes from lived experience too. And we know what it feels like when someone doesn't hear us or overlooks us or dismisses us, because we've been in spaces where the same message has been repeated by someone else's and everyone's, applauded because it's come out of a voice that feels more familiar to the people who were hearing it.
Is it because we already have this stigma that we perceive of ourselves? Or is it actually the environment itself? Because there's always two sides. And, with, if we're saying Black women, women of color, ethnic minorities, whatever label we want to put to it, some of these things are so, like, they go back of how we are supposed to behave. For most of us, we've come from a place where our parents had to fight for everything that they've got. We've seen our parents have to be, the head, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, to do the work, to get the work. And we've seen how they've been, and this is also within us. So I'm just trying to gauge, where does it stop of this stigma, this thing that we already hold against us going into this environment and bringing that with us, Can you speak to that?
I can, unfortunately, and it's as you say, we are the product of all of those years of experience. Our values come, we are observant as children. We see the dynamics and how they play out. We see how our parents have interacted in a far less fair time. And we take some of that on without always understanding the context. So it makes sense that we mirror it. We also know we're told not to make noise. We're told to be quiet, not to ruffle any feathers. One of my ladies is the CEO of a refugee organisation and has a refugee background. and has spoken about, you know, her own journey with her parents, being on a bus, being explicitly racially abused by the bus driver, um, you know, really protesting and being told off by her parent. You know, we don't do that. Don't you know this place isn't ours? You know, that sense of not being able to fully own that space. So we must always be grateful. We must always be quiet. We mustn't stand out. We mustn't be too loud. And we carry that into so many of our spaces, that sense of having to fit in and not to do anything to draw attention to yourself. So we carry these things. It's hard to navigate all of that noise, and a lot of that noise is internalized. So how do we go into spaces, cut through that, and show a different type of courage? Those are the types of things and the types of discussions I try and really prompt and encourage amongst my leaders, because one of the things we have to acknowledge is that we are not those children who were told and taught to be quiet anymore. When we're now in spaces of influence, we're being called upon. It is now our moral and social responsibility to speak up. That's become very counterintuitive to us. So we have to find ways, we have to find spaces where we can explore this and challenge this. And it has to be done delicately and it has to be sensitive, but we have to do it. The reason we have to do it is because we have so much power, passion, ideas, solutions. And because we haven't been heard, you know, these are really valuable contributions that we have to make to society. So we have to find a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me to this topic around how we are setting goals and, you know, claiming our space at the table and showing up. Because from our conversation, yes, there are two aspects to it. There's that aspect that we do bring on our own baggages, but also the baggages are still there because even the people at the table um, are bringing on their own perception, which has been carried down. But rightly so, it's up to us to expand and to show up in, I don't want to say in a much bigger way because everybody's different, but I've been really inspired by, just everything I've been seeing right now, like, with the Olympics and even in the music industry and all this Black people just inspiring me left, right, and center. Like, even I'm like, oh my God, like, I know I'm playing small. I would like, I'm playing small, and I've been really digging into like, in what ways have I been playing small? In what ways can I really like fully allow myself to show up in a much bigger way that is authentic to my way of being? So do you feel like when you are working with your leaders, because this is the thing, leaders who are inspiring others and how they are inspiring others and how they're setting goals, how does all these things seep into that?
See, this is something, you know, we talk about a lot, you and I, about the things that terrify us, setting goals that really, really start to shake us and really start to wake us up. So for the leaders that I work with, this is not an easy thing to do, you know, expanding our vision, wanting more for ourselves. And this is before we even think about what we're capable of. Is it okay to want more for ourselves? There's something for me that's really grounded in cultural expectations and our relationships with things like money. Is it okay to say, I want to be wealthy? I want to have so much wealth. I want to be able to have properties and holidays and cars and, you know, options and choices. And I also want to be able to build schools and build hospitals and, challenge all of the things that I see that aren't happening. If we've grown up with messages like money doesn't grow on trees, who do you think you are? And if we are from backgrounds and in families where we're maybe the first to go to university, or where even at the level that we are, which is nowhere near where we could be, we're still outperforming in many different ways to our siblings, our peers, cousins, sort of wider and extended family, that space can also start to feel quite excluding. So there's a backdrop where the people around you don't have the things that you aspire to have, as into how you'll be received. So it can get very, very complex. And some of my ladies in particular, who tell me that they know they're playing small, who know why they're playing small. They've described to me walking into spaces with big ideas, and because people just aren't ready for them, dialing those down, smalling themselves so that they are more socially acceptable. How do we tell those people that they can go big if in every situation they've been told to play small? So how that translates into the work that we do when we talk about goals, people think about tasks. When we talk about vision, people talk about short term. And some of that's to do with the charity sector, which is hugely under-resourced. And we can very easily engage in this real cycle of sort of hand to mouth, trying to make ends meet, back into that, familiar space of lack and graft and struggle. And before I come to what I think might be some of the solutions, for some of my ladies, if that's all they've known, there's a fear of what life looks like without that struggle, without that lack. And I think there has to be real courage, even to acknowledge that, because that's really, really hard to take on.
Yeah.
So for me, there's solutions in sisterhood, in talking, in even having spaces where we can just go into spaces and say, that's okay. Are you feeling like that? Because I'm feeling like that. And that's okay, that we can just sit in a space and acknowledge that it's sad, but it's okay. It's okay. We can forgive ourselves. We can forgive whatever circumstances brought us here. And now we can cheerlead each other on to different levels of brilliance. We can call out what we see in other people. These women that I work with, I love and I root for them so much. I call out the things that I see that are brilliant to them because I know they don't see it first.
Yeah.
So there's a nurture that we can give each other. For me, that's what real sisterhood looks like. It's just a space that feels comforting and nurturing, and we can grow from that. That's the spaces that some of us missed out on to some extent when we were children. So what we're doing is we're recreating those spaces so that we can feel that sense of strengthening.
Yeah. And somebody actually telling you that it's okay to want more. Like, you're not being greedy, because I feel the thing around some of the things that you've described there is a lot of us are used to, or we're brought up to survive. And that is the end goal, like there is there is enough. You've got shelter over your head. You've got food in the fridge. You've got a bed to sleep on, and that's enough. You should be grateful for that, which, gratitude is a big thing, as you know, in my life and in how I work. It's Gratitude is underrated, like being grateful for what we have. But there is a lot of work in being grateful for what we have and being open to more. I think it's a big thing. Being open to not just surviving, but to living a life that is richly blessed. There is this guilt and greediness that seeps into that. And I think maybe that keeps a lot of people back to an extent.
It's that thing around expectations, isn't it? I mean, ambition is something I really try and nurture in my children. Um, I have really mixed relationships with just that feeling around what it means to be ambitious and competitive because my children's school, they talk about participation, they talk about taking part. you know um, I talk to my children about running as fast as they can, and really helping out their team, but I want them to be the very best that they can be, and I want them to compete, and I want them to be ambitious. And you were talking about your mum, and I was thinking about my mum, and she passed away over 20 years ago. But one of the things she used to say to me is, somebody's child has to win the Nobel Prize. Why not my child?
I love that.
And
I love that.
and you take, the thing is, we're like sponges. So even though I lost her many, many years ago, I will never forget that. That's always, and why not me?
Yeah.
Why not me?
I love this idea. I always say this about, seeing the power in people. I love to see the power in people. Like when I speak to somebody and they come to my space and they're like, oh, for like this is what I want to create. I already, I feel it. I'm like, I'm there with you. Let's go,
Yeah.
because I see the power in people. So there is there's always two sides to everything. Us in leaders seeing the power in people, regardless of where they are. And this is what, again, I said, when I'm making my goals bigger, it has to be in a way that's aligned with how I am a person, because I don't want to become somebody else in the pursuit of these bigger goals. So us as leaders, seeing people as who they are, and as they are, seeing that there is power in who they are as they are. But us as well as leaders, seeing the power in ourselves and this ability and willingness to be able to dream bigger, regardless of what people think of us. Because looking at everything that we've spoken about, that woman who's watching right now, that woman in leadership who sometimes feels like, do you know what? I know there is more in me. There is more, and I want more. I know I can do more, but sometimes I feel restricted.
Yeah.
What would you be saying to this woman?
I think if any of these points are resonating for someone watching, it means they have more to give. And if they have more to give and more to say, I think the one thing I would invite them to consider or reconsider is, what's the very worst thing that can happen if you went for it? At worst, for some of us, we might be overlooked, we might be ignored. That's okay. We know what that feels like. We've been there. What's the very, very worst? And what do we stand to gain if we really go hard, if we really show up with all of our voice, in all of our glory, with all of our ideas, however big or however, even ill-formed? We haven't got it all nailed down, but here are the starting points as I see them. If we find ourselves, which as leaders we sometimes do in spaces of strategy, influence, and power, the worst thing that's going to happen is we'll be ignored. But if we use our voice, then there's just a chance that we might be able to leverage the privilege and power in that room, and we might just change the world. So I think that would be my parting thought.
That's so powerful. Thank you. I'll share your details to anybody that's watching in case they do want to contact you and ask you more, ask you questions or on anything that we spoke about.